Welcome back. So the Electricity Minister Kgosientso Ramokgopa is hosting a media briefing in Pretoria this morning, and it's to give an update on his visits to Eskom's power stations. Let's take you there live and listen in.
There's high levels of transparency in our communication to the state of the generation side in this instance, to the whole country, so that there's a better appreciation of the extent of the challenge or the crisis that is confronting us. So I'm going to map and take you through what these observations are. And they are very difficult and hard choices that have to be made going forward into the future, into the immediate, medium and long term. And let me hasten to mention that I will be presenting the more detailed comprehensive report to Cabinet. I'm saying more detailed because in that presentation to Cabinet, I'll be mapping out what the choices are that stands before us in order to resolve the load shedding question. But for purposes of this media briefing, communicating to the country, I'm going to, in the course of this presentation, just take you through what some of the options are before you without necessarily stating what the preferred option is, because that's the option, a determination that will be made by the Cabinet. But essentially what is confronting us is the need for us to ensure that everything that we do is in favor of South Africa and her people. So there are overriding considerations outside, if you like, the narrow confines of what is it that Eskom can offer, but more broadly the conversation is about what is in the best interest of the country to get the economy going. And that conversation essentially is going to be superior or more significant than just a conversation about the Eskom. So that's the point. It's not about how you preserve, protect, enhance essentially the balance sheet of Eskom, but is to make sure that we get sufficient electrons to power the economy and ensure that we resolve load shedding in our country. And let me also just say from the onset that I'm particularly grateful at the support that we have received from Minister Godan throughout all the power stations, all the visits were with the Department of Public Enterprise. It's a very powerful message there because it's an illustration of a joined-up government, just an appreciation that it is important that all the key players in the energy ecosystem are working together to ensure that we address this question. And these observations, I'm confident that are shared by our colleagues at the DDG level, who have been very kind enough to join us at all the visit to the power station. And the other remark just to make at the onset is to thank the board of Eskom. This is men and women with the impeccable track record as entrepreneurs, business leaders, academics, people who have nothing to offer but their expertise, the skill and time to ensure that the country comes out of a very, very difficult situation. So I want to extend my appreciation to Chairperson of Eskom, Mr. Makwana, for making it possible that every step that we're taking, we're able to take with us the people of Eskom, the board in this instance, because I think whilst the board performs the fiduciary duties, responsibilities, responsible for the overall strategy of Eskom, and the executive authority performs different functions. The DPE in this instance, Minister Godan, the shareholder representative, the Minister of Electricity is charged with the responsibility of reducing both the intensity and regularity of load shedding. We have been working together in this exercise, so I'm very grateful about what we have been able to achieve out of this exercise. So what is the question that is confronting us? So essentially we have a situation in the country where demand far outstrips supply, and we know that the supply essentially comes from the installed fleet of Eskom, over 52 gigawatts of generating capacity that is being that has been installed in Eskom. And we know that if you like, the energy availability factor, that is the efficiency of the operations of this fleet, is now standing on average at about 53%, and that explains why there's that gap, if you like, the deficit between the generation and the demand. And the quest that we are trying to do is to close that gap. Our initial computation suggests that we need something in the order of magnitude of about 6,000 megawatts for us to be able to close this gap. And this is a determination made on summer conditions. I make the point around summer conditions because on average, Eskom can guarantee us about 7,000 megawatts, and we know that the peak demand around the summer is about 32,000 megawatts. And then now we are entering winter, which is going to be a very difficult period, and I'll share with you what our thinking is there. The numbers suggest that historically the average is about 35,000 megawatts, but it can go up to 37,000 megawatts. So if you are sitting at if you like, a guaranteed supply of 27 megawatts. I said summer conditions were sitting at 32 megawatts. The delta or the difference is about 5,000 megawatts. And if this demand is going to go up to about 37,000 megawatts, the worst case scenario, and we are not able to improve on this 27,000 megawatts, you can see the gap there, the delta grows from 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts. So that's the scale or the magnitude of the challenge that is facing us. There are three ways of resolving this problem. The first one is to ensure that we ramp up generation capacity, and that explains the reason why we have been to Eskom just to ask the question from the various station managers, what is it that your station is doing a unit to ensure that we ramp up this generation so that we are able to close the gap between generation and demand. And then the second option that you can do is to ensure that we bring down this demand. And we know that the system operator, essentially someone who looks after the interest of the grid, to address the low frequency, that is when demand far outstrips supply, to maintain the system at what we call 50 hertz so that the system doesn't collapse. He introduces a mechanism that we commonly refer to as load shedding, essentially denying, if you like, the servicing of this demand. And that's why we are experiencing various stages of load shedding. So the other option of that we can resolve this problem is to bring down demand. So like I said, the first option, ramp up generation. The second option, bring down demand. The third option is our preferred option, is that you do both. You ramp up demand and ramp up generation and reduce demand. But as you reduce demand, you don't undermine the ability of household to meet their daily needs. You don't undermine the ability of commerce and business to operate and meet their commercial targets, so that we get the economy of South Africa going. And we'll share with you what are those interventions that we propose to make on the demand side, so that we are able to balance the equation. There are easy wins on both sides, on the generation side and also on the demand side. I'll expand on what those easy wins are. And then the second point to be made is around the configuration of demand in the country. So we know there's something that we call peak demand. So that's in the morning. So it's a concentrated, if you like, demand on generation. And that is typically around the period between about 5:30 to about 8 in the morning. So that's when we're preparing to go to school, we're preparing to go to work. We use all types of appliances. So there's pressure on the system. So that's the morning peak. And then there's also the afternoon peak. And we're experiencing the afternoon peak really between around 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening. That's when we're cooking and doing all other activities. So it's concentrated because we do that almost across the country at the same time. And that's an area that requires attention. And when there's that peak in the morning and in the afternoon, so there's a peak concentrated demand, and then it tapers down, it plateaus during the day I think there's average demand, and then it's going to pick up. There's another crest in the evening. So those are the two, if you like, Manhattans that we have to address, the morning and the do that when the demand is not, the generation is not sufficient. Eskom runs what we call the peaking plants. That's ankerleg, so that we are able to burn diesel to ensure that we close the gap on the demand, and we don't suffocate the South African economy. And there's another dimension that we know about the profile of generation in the country, is that your solar PV, its contribution to the generation mix essentially starts at 8:30 in the morning, and tapers down at about 4:30 in the afternoon. So 8:30 and 4:30, that's when we have the maximum, if you like, benefit of solar PV. So what is the point I'm trying to make? Is that solar PV, if it's not combined with other technologies such as battery and pump storage, it doesn't resolve your peaks. So essentially it comes at a point where you least need it, and at the point that you want it the most, is not available. So the point I'm trying to illustrate there is that your base load, essentially, that is, in our instance, is coal and also nuclear at Quebec, is the one that helps us to address the peaks. And then in an instance where the deficit or the difference is acute, then we run the peaking plants. That's when we get to burn a lot of diesel so that we don't go to higher stages of load shedding. So I thought that I must just share that with you so that there's a great level of appreciation on the contribution of the various energy mixes from a generation point of view, or if you like, technologies that contributes to the generation side. So let me take you through what some of the key finding per stations are, and then I'm also going to make, if you like, general or transversal observations that requires our collective attention, and then also on some of those I'll generate with you what I call options or optionalities, without necessarily telling you what is the preferred option, because it's a purview of the cabinet. I'll make the case there, and of course cabinet will make that determination. So we have categorized these 14 stations into what we call Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So why do we call them this other? What is the basis of that classification? The Tier 1 power stations, first is that the capacity or installed capacity per unit is far greater than all the other units in the fleet of Eskom. The second one is that they are the newest of the power stations in the country. The third one is that they've got significant technology advances, and they are highly automated. And as a result, the ratio of units per employee is lower in these units compared to the much older units. And the fourth key feature of these Tier 1 stations is that they are confronted with significant amount of emissions level when they got the permission to construct these power stations. I think the burden on reducing emissions has been overwhelming in comparison to the other stations. So that's the Tier 1 station. Who are those Tier 1 stations? The Tier 1 stations is Kusile and Medupi. And jointly, these Tier 1 stations, they give us about 9,600 megawatts. Just to put that into context, so if you have installed a capacity of about 52,000 megawatts, so this is just shy of 20% of the installed capacity of Eskom is sitting with these two power stations. So if you were to use another reference, essentially these two stations are too big to fail, because you are going to see their impact on the energy availability factor across Eskom, but you are also going to see their impact on the stages or the levels of load shedding if these two stations fail. So let me go into Medupi now. Remember, I made Tier 1, I said they give you approximately about 9,600 megawatts. So what do we know about Medupi? We know that Medupi has been commissioned over a period of time. There's about 6 units there in Medupi. The first unit was commissioned in 2015, and the last unit was commissioned in 2021. So in terms of power station, this is exceptionally very, very young. The first of the units, as I speak to you, is about 8 years old. And generally, on average, the design life of these power stations is about 50 years of life. So that's the design life of these stations. And I just said the first unit of Medupi commissioned in 2015. So it's almost about 8 years old. So we know that Medupi, once when it's firing, it's got an installed capacity of 4,764 megawatts. So the units are operating, barring one unit, which is Unit 4. And this Unit 4 had failed. I think there was a fire in August of 2021. And what is regrettable is that this unit is yet to come back. And it's something that I'll speak to much later in relation to our outage planning, issues around outage slips, and I'll explain what the technical definitions are on that. Just make sure that I carry everyone with me in my presentation on what are the transversal issues with regards to planning. And these are issues that requires urgent attention because they can help us to improve the performance of these units going into the future. And Medupi, as I speak to you, its energy availability factor, essentially the efficiency of the operation of the 5 units that are in operation. I just said that Unit 4 is out, is about 70%. And what are the issues that we have picked up in Medupi? These are not necessarily exhaustive, but these are issues that requires attention. The first one is that is what they refer to as a premature failure of units. I just told you that the oldest of the units there is 8 years old, and the youngest of those units there is about 2 years old. And yet you are experiencing failures. And when we're speaking to management, a significant proportion of this can be attributed to the issues that are well documented in the Zondo Commission around corruption, just the cutting of corners. And the second feature of what they're experiencing there is that there's a wide use of wrong material. So as the unit goes out of operation, as they are trying to fix it, they determine that these are, if you like, these are parts that are wrong, or these are not original parts. And of course, it talks to about cutting corners and people lining up their pockets, so to speak. But we know, as I speak to you now, that there are people who have been brought before the courts, and there's a judicial process that is unfolding. So what I'm saying is that we are paying the penalty, if you like, for those misdemeanors. Of course, the courts must still make that determination without preempting anything that is before the courts. And it's something that requires our attention. For a station that is this young to experience what we call unplanned capability load factor, essentially the failure rate of these units is sitting at about 24%. So if you like, 24% of the time these units are out, and we are unable to extract, if you like, the amount of electrons that is required to help us to power the South African economy going into the future. And then the third issue, which is also transversal, that will require attention, is the speed of procurement for new parts or replacement parts inside Eskom. Like I said, it manifests itself also in Medupi. It's something that requires attention, and we'll suggest to you how we propose to address that going into the future as a recommendation. So we can't impose on Eskom, but of course it's a point that we'll raise in cabinet. So what is the aggregate message that I'm sharing with you? The aggregate message I'm sharing with you at Medupi is that the interventions that are required there have little to do with whether we have declared a state of disaster or not. But the interventions that are required there are at a management level and also at a technical level. And let me also state that the failure of Unit 4 has nothing to do with the quality of the parts or the issues around design. It was about the procedural missteps on our part, and management has shared with us that the attention is given to that. The second station is Kusile in that Tier 1 stations. Kusile is installed, or if you like, at completion, is supposed to give us 4,600 megawatts. So we know that the first units were commissioned in 2017, and we are still in the process of commissioning other units. I think is unit number 4 and unit number 6. Unit number 1, 2 have been commissioned, and also unit number 5. And what do we know about Kusile is that there is the energy availability factor of the units that have been installed. I'm not talking about the units that have not been installed, because when you do a computation of the energy availability factor, it's on the units that have been commissioned, rather, that's the word to use, is at 37.4%. We know that of those 4 units, 3 of them are out, unit 1, 2, and 3. And why is that those units are out is because there was a significant failures in relation to what we've called the flue gas desulfurization component. I did say to you that these 2 power stations, Medupi and Kusile, they've got a responsibility to reduce emissions level compared to the older power generations and power stations, rather, and they've introduced a technology called FGD, flue gas desulfurization. Essentially, it's a chemical process that reduces the amount of sulfur in your emissions before you release it into the chimney and therefore into the atmosphere. And as a result of the failure of that chemical process, there was slurry that stacked on the chimney, and the weight of the slurry went into thousands of kilograms, which undermined the structural integrity of the chimney, and as a result, they had to discontinue those 3 units. And then, as a measure to ensure that we get these 3 units up and running without necessarily fully meeting, if you like, the emissions parameters, Eskom made an application to the Minister of Environment, Fisheries and Forestry to say that we ask for an exemption from those emissions level, so that it allows us as speedily as. But we still do commit to ensuring that we go back to meeting the emissions level over a period of time. And Minister Kgosientso did grant Eskom that exemption. And I have to emphasize that exemption was granted outside the provisions of the state of disaster. This is the powers that rest with the Minister of Environment, Fisheries and Forestry within the existing parameters of legislation. So what is the promise we are giving to the South African people is that Unit 3 is going to be returned on the 28th of November. Unit 1 will come back on the 11th of December. Unit 2 is projected to come back on the 24th of December this year. We're returning those 3 units back into operations. And by the 24th of December, we'll have an additional 2,160 megawatts on the system. So essentially, you are reducing, if you like, load shedding by 2 stages. So we're improving the performance of the grid. And then in the long term, what is it that we are doing? Of course, by February of next year, another unit will be commissioned. So I'm talking about the 3 units that have been out. The other units will be commissioned February of next year. The other unit is coming on stream. It's another 700 megawatts that will come on stream. So between now and February, if you like, there's 2,800 megawatts, just shy of 3 stages of load shedding, which will come on stream. What will it require in the long term for us to address the challenges at Kusile on the FDGs? So the team is working very hard, a team of competent men and women, young engineers, led by Mr. Bonga Mashazi. They have been able to diagnose the problem. So they are doing significant design modification to the flue gas desulfurization, so that we don't encounter the same problem that we have encountered. So that completes, if you like, tier one stations. Now I'm going to tier 2 stations. And tier 2 stations are significant in that essentially is the bulk of our generation capacity put together. They are a little bit older compared to Kusile and Medupi, but they are key to the sustenance, if you like, of energy generation in the country, and by extension, our ability to resolve load shedding. I'm starting, the first one is Kendal. Kendal, the first unit was commissioned in 1988, and the last unit was commissioned in 1992. So Kendal is meant to give us about the installed capacity is 4,116 megawatts, and the energy availability factor, as I speak to you now, is sitting at 46.75%. So you can see that of the 4,116 megawatts that is installed at Kendal, they are giving us less than 2,000 megawatts. And why is that the case? So the first one is that Kendal has got major problems with regards to the ability to remain within the parameters of the approved emissions. So Unit 1, we are losing about 200 megawatt as a result of load losses. So what that means is because they're having great difficulty in meeting their emissions level, they have to slow down the car, which is your generations at the various units. So Unit 1, for an example, they have to slow down the car by about 200 megawatts. Unit 2, they have to slow down the car by about 100 megawatts. Unit 3, they have to slow down the car by about 300 megawatts. So we can get an additional 1,000 megawatts at Kendal by ensuring that we address the issues of emissions. And there's a need for us to invest in the technology that can help us to ensure that we run these units without necessarily having to slow them down and without undermining our licensing requirements from an emissions point of view. So here there are options that can be taken. So the first option is that continue as is. So essentially lose 1,000 megawatts at Kendal. So it's an additional stage of load shedding and preserve the environment, ensure that we protect posterity, we remain within the confines of the law. The second option is to say that no, we are going to run these units at full capacity, and then you are in breach of the law, but you are able to save us 1,000. We are able to add another 1,000 megawatts to the grid, and then you are able to lower the stages of load shedding by one stage. The third option that you can do, apply to the authority that has the prerogative of determining, if you like, exemptions, to say, I need an exemption for this period, but I'm committing that in this period, I'm going to take the following actions. One, to mitigate the risk in relation to emissions level, but ultimately ensure that I remain within the parameters of the new emissions level. So that one, I don't destroy the environment, but two, I do continue to sweat this asset and give the additional 1,000 megawatts that is needed. So you have three options. As is, then the economy suffers, 1,000 megawatts is locked as a result of our inability to run the car at its maximum capacity. The second one, run it at the maximum capacity, save the economy, you are doing great harm to the environment. Unit option 3, do both. In the short term, accept that there's going to be harm to the environment, commit to a program to ensure that I'm going to retrofit technology to ensure that I remain within the parameters, but at the same time, I'm saving the environment. There are pros and cons to all of those. I'm just presenting to the country that those are the three options that are before us, and we'll present to Cabinet what our preferred option is, and Cabinet will make a determination. So it's not for us to make that determination. But the authority, independent of what Cabinet thinks and what the Eskom thinks, will make that determination, because the authority is not influenced by us or the facts that are before the authority before making that determination. So I'm not preempting what the outcomes or the decision of the authority will be, but essentially it's about what these options are. Go for an option, and for the law, we want to ensure that we save the economy, and 3, to show that in the long term we are going to remain within the parameters of what is the emissions level. And then station number 4 is Matimba. This is one of our best performing stations, The energy availability factor is sitting at 75%. Of course, the target is to go beyond that. They have illustrated in one of the units they had reached previously over 80% of energy availability factor. That is important for station managers to have that appreciation. 80% factor, of course, it's giving us 3,990 megawatts. First commissioned in 1987, and the last unit was commissioned in 1991. So what are the two big problems they are experiencing there? The first one is in the delays in the procurement in relation to getting parts that are required to fix the units and get the units back into operation. And this brings me back to that question I raised earlier on, what I call outage slips. So what that means is that I'm going to need it for about 4 days. I'm going to fix it in that 4 days and put it back in a better condition, and therefore we're able to extract as much megawatts as possible. But when you're experiencing outage slip, that means although you have set yourself a target that I'm returning this unit in 4 days, you find that you're returning it in 5 days, even a month later than what planned. What are some of the causes of that? Is that sometimes when they take these units out, the parts are not available. So it's a planning issue. So this has nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster. It has to do with a planning issue. But the next question that has to be asked is that planning also is undermined by procurement, because one of the things they have to do, they've got their supplier database, they go out to suppliers, this is the preferred supplier because of the price, the supplier then goes to the original equipment manufacturer, you find that the equipment is expensive, the supplier that has been chosen doesn't have the necessary liquidity to purchase that, doesn't have the guarantees to give to the original equipment manufacturer. He or she had promised, I'll bring the parts within 3 days. After 3 days, he or she is not able to raise the kind of money that is required to procure that supply component and give it to Eskom, to Matimba in this instance, and therefore that process has failed. They must restart the process again, and that extends and extends and extends until plant managers are losing, if you like, time, and they are not able to return these parts back, the components back into operation. And we are making that determination. There are transversal issues. This is one of those that is found almost across Eskom. So one of the solutions that you can make, of course, when you give opportunity to suppliers, it's about broadening the cake, making sure that the opportunities are available to everyone. But there's a cost to the economy. So if you are unable to meet your obligations within that time frame, we are not getting the megawatts that we need for us to power the South African economy. So that's the option. You can proceed that, but accept that there's a casualty, and that casualty is the South African economy. The second option is to say, in this period of crisis, because our priority is to save jobs, make sure that farmers produce, retailers don't have to carry inordinate amount of operational costs, make sure that small businesses are operating by ensuring that we provide a reliable energy supply. So in this short period, you could say that, no, we're doing away with the need for you to go to individual suppliers. Just go direct to the original equipment manufacturer. And in this way, we're able to fix quick. We get the economy going. Once we have established stability, there's additional or excess capacity, then you go back to the supply. So those are the choices that sits before us. So you can see, this has nothing to do with the declaration of a state of disaster. It's about the ability to plan and just foregoing, if you like, this kind of arrangement, accepting that we are faced with a crisis, we need to address this crisis. Again, in Matimba, the issue we have there is around the issue of the quality of coal. So this is not the coal that is being tracked from outside. That has to do with the so-called cartels in the trucking industry and poor coal. Has to do with our inability to ensure that we invest in the mines that are bringing us coal. Some of these coal mines are what we call cost plus mine. So what that means is that Eskom has got an obligation to invest in that coal mine to get the kind of quality coal that they want. And you'll find that also when you go to Tuka, when you go to Letabo, that's a problem that's there. We are not investing in that coal mine. So we can't be blaming the miner. The miner mines where you said he must mine, and of course you are going to reach levels where you have mined out good quality coal that gives you the right calorific value and therefore a better burn rate, and therefore you are getting greater levels of efficiency. But once you get to poor coal, although it still remains within the design parameters, accept that you are going to compromise on the efficiency of the plant, and therefore Eskom needs to invest in there. And we know that the ability of Eskom to invest, its constraints on its balance sheet are well documented. So those are choices that must be made, if you like, to make sure that we improve this performance at Matimba. They go beyond 75%, they go close to 80%. And then the next station is Majuba. Again, Majuba, first unit commissioned in 1996. The last unit was commissioned in 2001. The energy availability factor again is 47.95%. So you can see that we are not achieving the kind of efficiency that we want, and it requires our collective, if you like, management to ensure that they address this question. What are the preeminent questions there is the issues around the milling plant, not operating at the right level. So there has to be significant amount of investment there. So you can see investment in the coal plus mine, investment in some of these milling plants requires that there has to be capital expenditure on the part of Eskom. And I did make the point that the constraints on Eskom balance sheet are known and they are documented. So we need to make those choices. Is it about saying that the Eskom balance sheet can't carry this investment, and yet we know the cost to the South African economy as a result of unmet demand? Or there has to be a rethink of how you finance this capital requirement? We'll make our submissions to Cabinet on what is possible, because we think that you need to think outside the Eskom balance sheet. You need to think about the broader implications on the South African economy. So the preoccupation can't just be Eskom balance sheet. The preoccupation must be what is the cost to the South African economy. And we know, some have written extensively, that the cost of unserviced energy is about 500 billion rands to the South African economy. The Reserve Bank projects that growth will be about 0.2%. That's barely growth, if you were to ask me. We know the cost to employment. We know the cost to various industries that are major employers in this country. The agricultural sector, we met the other day with the OEM in the automotive sector. They are beginning to share with us some of the options that are confronting them. So the conversation there is about whether there's a possibility of providing additional fiscal support to make these investments so that we save the South African economy. Of course, when you provide that fiscal support, it means that your debt to GDP or your budget deficit is likely going to grow. Of course, that's not our domain, it's a domain of national treasury. But we are able to show you the other side, that the Commissioner of the Reserve Bank of SARS would have given us even much more spectacular results than the kind of results that he has achieved, which are exceptional. And he has told us that load shedding has reduced, if you like, the ability for us to collect additional revenue by, I think, close to about 60 billion rands or so. I think that's the number that he raised. So that's the cost to the South African economy. So these are difficult and hard choices. But we know from Majuba, when we sat with them, expressed our displeasure that we can't be operating at 47.95%, which is still lower than the average of the installed fleet of Eskom. And they've shared with us interventions that they'll be making. And as a result of those interventions, they should be able to give us an additional 1,880 megawatts going into the future. So that's the story of Majuba. Then I'm taking you to Letabo. Letabo here in the Sasolburg.
The energy availability factor is 73.81%. Again, one of our best performers. The installed capacity is 3,708 megawatts. And then there's issues again. Quality of coal. So the quality of coal has little to do with the miner, has everything to do with Eskom's inability to reinvest in that mine because it's a cost-plus mine. So we bear the responsibility of investing in that mine. And the miner has said that I have good quality, good deposits of coal that can meet the kind of calorific value that you want so that we push up the energy availability factor. But because of those constraints at Eskom with regards to their balance sheet, they are unable to make new capital investment in these coal-plus mines. And then the net result is that the economy suffers because we are not able to lift further the energy availability factor, which is something that requires our attention. Again, Majuba and Letabo, nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster, but the constraints on the Eskom balance sheet. We are raising a different question, that the conversation should not be about the constraint on the Eskom balance sheet and therefore its inability to make this capital investment. The conversation is, what is the cost to the South African economy as a result of our failure to make that investment? And then rethink of how you can solution the best way to make investment and extract maximum value out of these units so that we get to power the South African economy. Like I said when I started, it is about the South Africa and her people, and by extension the economy. That's our conversation, and our conversation is not restricted to Eskom, but Eskom is indispensable to the resolution of the generation problem in our country because of their dominance in that space. They have been a monopoly, and hitherto, henceforth, we know that we are introducing additional generation capacity, but they are a dominant player, and therefore they are indispensable. They must help us to carry the country to resolve this problem. And then I'm taking you to Tutuka. So we know in Tutuka that there's first unit 1985, the last unit 1990 to be decommissioned. It's important so that we have an appreciation of age. You can see on Letabo that this about 1985, you can see it's about close to 38 years of age. Letabo, but it's still giving us 73.81%. What is the message there? There is no correlation between the energy availability factor and age. It's important that we dispel that myth. When I started earlier on, I was able to show you that one of our youngest stations, Kusile, the energy availability factor is at 37.1. You can argue that technical issues, but I'm trying to illustrate to you that there is no relationship between age and the performance of the plant. So we must dismiss that and say that it's a function of our ability to maintain, plan maintenance, investment in the coal quality, and I've made the point around how we could, some of the efforts we could be making in the cost plus mines. And then Tutuka, like I said, 1985 to 1990, its installed capacity is 36,654 megawatts. One of our worst performers is performing at 26.02%. So the best opportunity for us to eliminate a stage or two of load shedding doesn't sit with Letabo because it's already up there. There's so much that you can extract out of Letabo. I think that's much. There's so much you can extract out of Medupi. Of course, their unit, the one unit that is out is 700 megawatts. So it's about 3 times the of the units, average size of the units at some of the smaller power stations like Anode. But you can see that the best opportunity for us is to, amongst others, is to address these problems at Tutuka. What are those problems at Tutuka? So they say Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, they are old and there are issues around design flaws. And then when you go to the other units 4, 5, and 6, they've refurbished those. And they are able to extract, if you like, maximum, of course, within operating condition. They are able to extract maximum efficiency. So the point they are simply making is that if we were to reinvest in the same manner that we reinvested in Unit 4, 5, and 6, we are likely going to get an exceptional amount of additional megawatts out of Unit 1, 2, and 3. Why are those investments not made? Again, is the constraint on the Eskom balance sheet. And I'll keep on going back to this conversation. The conversation must be beyond what is the challenges on Eskom balance sheet, but what is in the best interest of the country. And therefore, we might need additional capital to ensure that we are able to refurbish these units and extract as much as it is possible going into the future. I mean, for example, Unit 3, one of the 3 older units, has been out since the 16th of December. And when we visited there just about last week, that unit was still out. Again, because they are unable to detect what is the root cause. And they say they can't make that determination because the unit is old. But on much newer units, they are able to easily determine the root cause, address the unit root cause, and return the unit back into operation. And that's something that requires attention. And something that is hanging in the air in Tutuga is the fact that it's meant to be decommissioned by 2030. So essentially, in the next 7 years, the system is going to lose 3,654 of installed megawatts. When in fact I'm standing before you, I'm saying that the country is short of 6,000 megawatts just to break even. When I say break even, just to get the economy going. But we know that for additional growth of the South African economy, you need additional capacity to be on stream. And yet there's plans that in the short term we must be decommissioning this. So the math doesn't add up. You can't be looking for additional megawatts when there are projections to take out other megawatts. What it does, it plunges the country into darkness, literally, and undermine the ability for us to achieve our developmental goal. So that's one of the transversal issues. You will see it plays itself in other power stations that are likely going to be decommissioned in the midst of the crisis that is confronting us. So that's a decision that the cabinet must make. You can make that determination that they've reached their design life, let's decommission them. They are very expensive to operate, but it comes at great cost to the South African economy. So you just do a bit of modeling. What is it that the economy can absorb? Where I'm standing, it's about jobs, it's about growth, it's about expansion of opportunities, making sure possible that we keep on improving generation capacity going into the future. Again, Tutuga is supplied by cost plus mine. Quality of coal has nothing to do with the mine, I must emphasize. Has everything to do with our ability or inability to invest in the mine to ensure that we go into areas, have shafts that we are going to get good quality coal of the right calorific value, improve the burn rate, has got implications on both the efficiency and the quality of the emissions. So that's a calculus that should be before us at all times to ensure that we are able to address this question going into the future. As a result of Tutuga being decommissioned in the next 7 years or so, they are losing a lot of experienced engineers. So there's no appetite. One of the things that I picked up when I went to the Eskom power station is the absolute lack of morale. I mean, people are despondent. They don't see the future there, when in fact the country and Eskom has invested a lot in them, but we are about to lose them as a result of what is apparent, what is lying ahead. And then as I move, gallop towards the end, it's Mantla. Mantla, first unit, 1979, and then the last unit, 1983, 3,600 megawatts of installed capacity. The EAF, 53.75%, just averaging out. Of course, they've got a target that they can ramp it up to 65%. And we said that we must be aggressive, but still be realistic about what will constitute the target. Because it's important when we communicate to the country on what these targets are. We are confident about our ability to meet those targets. It's one thing to proclaim a target, it's quite another to achieve a target. But don't also understate your ability to achieve certain targets. It's important that we remain realistic and yet ambitious. We can do those simultaneously. And then there's also on Mantla, we are losing megawatts as a result of the quality of coal. They've computed what that is, and I'm going to aggregate what is it that we can, the amount of additional megawatts that can come on stream as a result of us just improving on the quality of coal. And I did say that on the cost plus mines has nothing to do with the miner, has everything to do with our ability to ensure that we are able to address the investments that is required to get the kind of quality coal that we want. And then the next, number 9, is Krill. 1976 to 1979, installed capacity 3,000 megawatts, the EAF 49.64%, dipping below the average of 53, dipping below 50%, although their targets will be the average target at 53. You can see there's a significant opportunity there. There's 1,500 megawatts that we are not getting as a result of our inability, first, to address the issue that have to do with the cooling towers. So what they are saying there is that 90% of their partial load losses. A partial load loss means that the machine is running, the unit is running, but instead of running at 600 megawatts, it's running at 400 megawatts. That's all that I'm saying. So those are the partial. And others are unplanned when you take out the unit as a result of trips. And partial load losses, 90% of that is as a result of our underinvestment in the cooling towers. Again, we can recover this. Has nothing to do with the declaration of state of disaster. It's about the investments that we must make into this asset to be able to extract all of this. Again, the conversation can't be restricted to the Eskom's balance sheet. The conversation must be restricted, must be expanded to what is in the best interest of the sovereign. That indeed there are going to be these investments that we can make with all its implications. If you were to borrow, debt to GDP, and of course that's the cost you are going to pay, or if you like, the budget deficit. But over a period of time, you are able to recover the South African economy, you are improving the collections in your National Revenue Fund, you are able to defray those capital costs, and you get the economy of the country going. Of course, in Kriel, they say, as a result of these partial load losses, per day they are losing 960 megawatts. So we can recover a stage of load shedding by making those interventions. And all we are saying, compute what is the cost to the South African economy of one stage of load shedding. We'll arrive at that number. And you'll see that that number can justify us making these investments going into the future. And then the next number 10 is Duva. 3,000 megawatts is giving us 40.34%. So essentially when you go to Duva, there's 60% that there's 1,800 megawatts of installed capacity that the country is not benefiting from. So those are the interventions that must be made. The one thing that must be said about Duva, they were able to illustrate to us that as a result of the interventions, they put a dedicated team, 3 teams working on trying to improve performance per unit. And I guess that's a template that you can export to other units, to other power stations. A dedicated team that is focused just on the unit. And as a result of that, they were able to add another 1,020 megawatts. It's about planning, it's about understanding the nature of the problem, and that's how you are going to address this situation going forward. Now I've left the tier 2, I'm going to the tier 3. So these are the old ladies of the power stations. They are older than a lot of you in this room. These are fellows that they've been pushing for many years, over 50 years of being in operation. If you go to the tier 3, Arnold, for an example, 2,220 megawatts. These are much older. The units were giving you about 200 megawatts per unit. The tier 2 that I was sharing with you, per unit, they were giving you about 600 megawatts per unit. The tier 1, they are giving you anything between 700 and 800 megawatts per unit. That's Kusile and Midupi. So what do we know about Arnold? We know that there's a unit 2 and 3 will be decommissioned by 2026. So I'm sitting here before you. I'm saying we're looking for megawatts. But then there's a plan to remove these 2 units, about 400 megawatts, in the next 3 years, out of commission. So I'm just saying the conversation must happen. What is that conversation? We know that you can extend the life of these units so that you protect the South African economy. Of course, you'll raise other issues around emissions, making sure that you get the technology to help you to remain within those parameters. And that's technology is not expensive. It's not inexpensive. It's very expensive. I mean, if you go to the FGD, the flue gas desulfurization unit, that helps us to reduce the amount of sulfur content that is in Kusile and is also meant to be rolled out in Midupi. It's 40 billion rands per unit. That's what you require. But if you are to use that technology, these old power stations are not designed from a technical point of view to accommodate that component. And therefore it means that your FGD is not your solution for those units. You must look for other solutions to ensure that you reduce the amount of sulfur and the amount of emissions. So that's why Arnold is operating at 50.4%. And then you go to Hendrina, 1970, the first unit, 1976, the other unit is operating at 23.3%. It has 10 units that we're giving you 200 megawatts per unit. 4 units, as I speak to you, are out of operation. So we are short of 600 megawatts. 4 units are out of operation. Of course, when you advance the case to say, but why can't we get these units going? I suspect the answer will be that is the cost of getting those units up and running. And I'm saying have a different conversation. And that first argument is that the balance sheet can't afford it. I'm saying, but expand the possibility of what we can do in these plans. Ask the question, what is the cost of not having 800 megawatts into the South African economy? And that is just shy of 1 stage of load shedding. And I think that is going to reconfigure the conversation. And the point we are raising there is that even if it's not about the Eskom balance sheet, ask what private sector can do without relinquishing ownership of those assets. And that's what we are presenting. The market can tell you that, of course, these units, we have decommissioned them. We can go in there, we can refurbish, use the latest technology, operate them, extend their design life. Of course, without necessarily owning them, we operate, we'll transfer. It still becomes the Eskom asset, or if you like, the asset of the people of the country. So I'm not talking about privatizing that. No, we're not far from that. It's about using market opportunities to ensure that in the shortest possible space of time, we are able to address these challenges going into the future. And then there's issues of Grootvlei. Grootvlei still has that problem. These are older units that requires attention. Again, I think there's about 3 units there that are out of commission. And again, 200 megawatts per unit. And those are the issues that requires attention. Can we afford to have such a situation? You go to Camden, again, one of the old ladies of the fleet, there's an intention, there's 3 units that must go out now, I think by June. The one was meant to go out when we were there, when we were visiting the plant. So you are taking out 600 megawatts, and I'm saying we're looking for 6,000 megawatts. So essentially we are taking out 10% of that which we are looking for. And you can see in Camden, it's still performing. I'm not talking about units that are not performing. In Camden, it's still performing. We can still extract a lot of value out of Camden, but it's something that we have chosen not to pay attention to. And it's meant to close down by 2025. So essentially in 2025, 2 years' time, or less than 2 years, the system is going to lose 1,561 megawatts. And the point we are simply making is that you have to rethink how you want to address these questions going forward. And then there's Quebec, as I conclude. Quebec is about 1976. The first unit is 2 units at Quebec. That gives us 960 megawatts. The 1 unit has been in operation since 1984. That's unit 1, which is currently out. And of course, they've missed their own, what I call outtake sleep. So they are out by 40 days. They were meant to come back, I think, end of June, July. Now they are extending it to sometime in August. So it simply means that the system, at the time when we need this energy the most, we know that the coldest period of winter comes the other side of May. When we thought we'll return it, this system will be, this unit will not be back on stream. And it's something that requires our attention. And then immediately after that, 2 months after that, Unit 2 must go out as part of our licensing conditions. As I conclude, I want to indicate that as a result of the underperformance of this base load, we are putting an inordinate amount of pressure on our peaking plants. So we are running these open cycle gas turbines like nobody's business. These things are meant to be on load about 4% of the time. That's when you call on them to say, come and help us, we are in trouble, just 4% of the time. But now as I speak to you, we need them 11.5% of the time. And that means that we are consuming a lot of diesel. We know that between the period of 2014 and 2017, in fact, the situation was worse. How we stave off load shedding was we're burning diesel. It was sitting at about 21.5%. During those periods, on average, 2013 to 2017. Now we're sitting at 11.5%. If these base loads, these stations that I shared with you, continue to underperform, it means we must run these peaking plants, the open cycle generators. So let me just give you a sense. When you burn this fuel, this diesel, per hour, you consume about 45,000 liters. That's how much you are consuming. So the more you consume, and it's 2 of these units that you need at Ankerleg. So essentially it's 90,000 liters of diesel per hour. So that's the cost to the South African economy. No, that's the cost to the fiscus. And then the next conversation is, if we are unable to get the kind of base load that helps us to close this gap on the demand side, we have to run this plant. I'm saying they come at great cost. You must answer a different question. There is a question to the fiscus, the actual amount that you use to buy the diesel. And then there's a cost of not running them to the South African economy. It means that you could be at higher stages of load shedding. These are difficult choices that are confronting us. We are going to cabinet and presenting before cabinet what we think is the best solution to our problems here. As I conclude, I want to tell you about the transversal issues. There's people issues there at Eskom. People issues, nothing to do with the leadership, by the way. People issues to do with, if you like, job security. I told you that Camden is closing. There are a number of stations that are closing. Grootfontein, the units are gone. And not the units are going. That's people attached to that. And there is no additional incentive for people to apply themselves. The best that you need to run these plants don't see their future at Eskom. And I'm just saying it's a conversation we must have. And as we say we discontinue this unit, it's important to say to us, where is that additional generation capacity that can meet this base load, the megawatt per megawatt? It's one thing to have to be on an accelerated path of decarbonization. And by the way, renewables is the future. You can see the aggregate share of the energy mix is growing exponentially. But you are sitting with a crisis now that is undermining energy sovereignty of this country. People are out of jobs. The economy is on its knees. Businesses are closing. Farmers can't produce. They're passing on that cost to the end consumer. The poor are disproportionately affected. There are very difficult choices that are before us, and we are helping to make that determination on what should continue to be, what should be the case going forward. And one of those choices is, do you close at the current rate, undermine the ability of the economy to recover, exacerbate the load shedding problem, or you delay, refurbish, there's capital cost associated with that. The South African economy stands up, it's able to run on its own. You create opportunity for us to take units out for plant maintenance and secure the future of this country and posterity. I think that's the situation that is confronting us. And then there are also design issues. Attend to the issues of outage sleep. So essentially, you say, I'll return this unit by this date, you fail to return. The total amount of megawatts that were absent from the grid was 1,900 as a result of outage sleeps. So when management says, I will return this unit by this date, and it doesn't come back, there's 1,900 megawatts. Just the other day, I think it's 2 days ago, which we could not get as a result of outage sleeps. That's not a state of disaster, it's a planning issue. And by extension, it's a procurement issue. It is that dispensation of saying, let's go straight to the original equipment manufacturer. then we are able to reduce the stages of load shedding, get the economy going, we'll be able to expand opportunities to everyone. The other one that I kept on repeating is about investments into these assets to address emissions in those coal plus mines, because on contract we can determine what is the quality of coal that we want. On the cost plus, we have to make those investments. It's a capital cost. You will argue that the Eskom balance sheet can't carry. I'm saying answer a different question. Can the South African economy afford that? And the answer is an emphatic no. And that's a balancing act that needs to happen. So in conclusion, we know that Kusile will give us 2,100 megawatts projected by the 24th of December. We know that if we address the Kendall issues of emissions, I've shared with you what the options are, and I didn't tell you what is our preferred option, which we'll present to Cabinet. It's about 1,000 megawatts. We know that as a result of improvements in the coal quality, investing in those mines, not necessarily about the miners. Of course, it comes at cost to the fiscal, it comes at cost to the Eskom balance sheet, but the returns are greater to the South African economy. We can get about an additional 1,200 megawatts. And then just on the cooling towers, as Krill was raising and others, there's another 900 megawatts. So if you like, it's 2,100, is 1,000, is 3,100. Is another 1,200, is 4,300. It's another 300, is 4,600. It's another 900, is about 5,400 of these megawatts that are locked there. And once we address the issues of slips, returning the units as planned, and outage planning is thorough, then you're talking, like I said just the other day, was 1,900 megawatts. So suddenly you could be out of load shedding. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. It is those choices that must be made. And we'll present that to Cabinet and come back to the country and say this is what is possible. You will see that in this submission. I've not said anything about additional generation from the renewable energy complex, because we'll be engaging with them. I'm giving you feedback on the fossil fuel and nuclear. I will come back and give you feedback on the renewables to say this is what is on stream, this is what is possible, these are the number of projects that are on stream, these are the number of electrons that can be evacuated. By that I mean, as a result of the weaknesses or the capacity of the grid, we are unable to evacuate the electrons. The renewable energy complex in this country is in the Northern Cape, but the grid capacity is in Mpumalanga, coming to the center and to the south for obvious reasons, because mines are constructed, power stations are constructed at the mouth of these mines, closer to source, so closer to feedstock. But your renewable energy complex is in the Northern Cape, and then it's take or pay. Whether Eskom is using these electrons or not, they must pay. And that's why it's got implications on their tariff structure. Because they are paying and yet we don't get this benefit. Or in some instances, they must slow down what the units can produce, their own units, because we must accommodate some of these renewables. So it's important that there has to be investment in the grid, and that's a conversation. We'll come back to you so that we take you step by step, and there's an appreciation of what is possible going into the future. And as I conclude, like I do all the time, I'm more than confident that we've got both the capacity, the will, and the expertise to resolve this load shedding. I'm more than confident. And I'm sure that once I go to Cabinet and map up what these options are, we should be able to say to you that these are the timelines that it takes. Of course, on others, the timelines are known. They are public on what Kusile can do. On the issues of emission is a function of whether you go this option, that option. If you choose the option of exemptions, but committing to mitigating and over a period to addressing those emission levels is another 1,000 megawatts. The issues around investments in the quality of coals at the mine, so that we assist the miners to get us the right quality of coal, right calorific value, burn rate, and therefore the efficiency of the plant and the reduction of the emission. It's possible if we make those investments. And then the issues around ensuring that we keep up the morale, essentially extending the life of these plants, giving us a scope and play for us to be able to get the 6,000 megawatts and not be on an aggressive, accelerated path of decarbonization, but still committing to the decarbonization journey. It's a conversation that only Cabinet can have, and make that determination is not mine, and I don't want to preempt it. So I'll conclude there, and my apologies for being. I thought that it's important that it's not a traditional press conference. It's just to take everyone through on what these issues are, so that there's a common appreciation of what this means. And you have seen in everything that I've shared with you, there is nothing that is reliant on the declaration of state of disaster. That you go to direct to the original equipment manufacturer, you invoke the provisions of the PFMA. Could be either emergency agency or sole provider, whichever one is appropriate. You making investments in those cooling towers, refurbishing some of these plants, has nothing to do with the state of disaster. You returning units at the time that you committed to what I call outage state slips has nothing to do with issues of state of disaster. It's got everything to do with planning. And that's the point that we're making. Thank you very much. We'll take the questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, I'll take questions. If you could please just introduce yourself in the media house, just for our noting before you ask the question. I'll start the side, you'll be first. Second, Heidi third. You'll be fourth. Thanks.
Minister, it's Diazone Tonje from Eyewitness News. As you mentioned there in your conclusion, this is not a traditional press briefing, and it was very technical. But I wanted to just ask if you could simplify this for the normal person out there on the street. What are the problems, or the top 3, top 5 problems that you've identified, and what are the possible solutions, without getting too technical, just so that our viewers and our listeners will be able to understand them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, Minister. Thank you for that very detailed briefing on all the different power stations. You are focusing, at least here, on maintaining and improving the performance of these power stations. Well, actually, for the last 3 years, we've heard a lot about that from the previous CEO of Eskom and so forth. And what we kept also hearing was that additional generational capacity is needed in order to have the space to do the kind of maintenance that needed to happen for, to improve the EAF. And that additional generation capacity hasn't been there. I mean, you haven't talked about additional capacity from elsewhere. And I just wondered how you think all of this is going to be possible without it. And then coming back to money, and yeah, the Eskom balance sheet is one thing, but the government also has a balance sheet, which is a bit tight. And if we go the route of focusing on coal, extending the life of coal plants, rather than decommissioning them according to the schedule, not more aggressively, it's the $8.5 billion that was promised to South Africa to help a transition away from coal and perhaps be used to strengthen the grid will not be there. And I just wondered, how that factors into the equation. And then my last question, during the budget, the Treasury talked about, the Finance Minister talked about a plan to concession out the coal plants to improve the EAF. And there is a report from an international consortium which is due in June. Where are we with this? Is that still on the table? Is that part of your framework here? And sorry, just one more. When are you going to be presenting your options to Cabinet? Thank you.
You didn't give us your name in media.
Sorry. It's Mariam Issa, and I'm with EE Business Intelligence.
Heidi.
Heidi Chagos from the NCA. I just want to ask Minister, with all the issues that you've raised, forecast look like for winter? You said that you would tell us, so I'm just wondering what that looks like. And then I have this question, Minister, please ask the Minister if his authority has been fully defined. President said in his SONA that the authority of the Electricity Minister would be set up. So what authority does he have compared to Minister Gwede and Minister Praveen as far as Eskom and other energy matters are concerned? And then I just want to ask a question around the national state of disaster. Were any decisions made under the national state of disaster to deal with the energy crisis? Any important decisions that were made? And if so, what does that mean because the national state of disaster has been terminated? Thank you.
Okay, last question. I'll take a second.
All right. Good morning, Minister Kgosientso here from the SABC. Mine is also on the national state of disaster. We saw the move to lift the national state of disaster, and you at length went on to say that most of the findings there at these power stations had nothing to do with the declaration of the national state of disaster. Then could we say that this announcement was rushed of us as a country going into a national state of disaster before taking into considerations all the groundwork that needs to be done to inform that move to declare the national state of disaster? Also, in line with what my colleague asked there around the fact that you are going to be approaching cabinet here for some of these issues to be solidified. When are we seeing this happen? The temperatures are dropping, we're inching towards winter, and people are in need of some sort of a reprieve here. Are we expecting to see you, promptly approaching cabinet here? And what would be your expectations in terms of some of the short-term and the long-term issues that you've noted down as the intervention methods that are needed there? And also just finally on the deployment of the army at some of these facilities. So we saw the president announcing that the armies would be deployed to some of these facilities. What are their findings? They've been stationed there. Have they actually given you some sort of feedback to say that this is what we are finding and this is what we've managed to really in any way mitigate since our deployment to some of these stations? Do we expect to see them also continuing in their mandate there, or these interventions really don't in any way accommodate them stationed at some of these power plants? Thank you.
Thanks. I think I'll take the last two. The Minister can answer overall. So I'll start with you.
Hi, Minister. My name is Tim Bedwell. I'm from Bloomberg News. Just in addition to the question from EE Intelligence on the capital refurbishments, sounding like you are going to require a lot of money. Obviously, that will be up to the finance minister to make the determination of where the money comes from. But do you have a figure in mind around about how much we would need to bring about the kind of progress that you would like to see? And then with the exemptions for the emissions, would that just be with regard to the Kendal power station, or are there others that would benefit from those kinds of exemptions? And maybe if you can elaborate further, do you have sort of timelines in mind for how long those exemptions would be for in order to maximize that benefit? And then finally, just in terms of the targets that have been set out in the Action Energy Plan, in your findings, have you identified any targets that might need to be amended? Maybe we can bring some forward, maybe some needs to be extended longer, etc. Thank you.
Morning, Minister. This is Amanda Khoza from the Sunday Times. I just want to know, is the Minister saying that there was no need for a state of disaster to be declared?
Morning, Minister. It's Omarewani from KFM. Minister, investment in the quality calls increasing lifespan of some of the units, improving cooler towers or systems. Do we have the budget, Minister? Eskom cannot afford that. Where is the money going to come from? Thank you.
Okay, now thank you very much for those questions. Sonda, part of the difficulty of the conversation is very technical. And as an engineer, I've got a great affinity to numbers. But let me try and simplify it, because I think it's a justified request that Just simplify it, man, to an ordinary person. Okay. I'm going to use the metaphor of a car. And I'm going to use an Audi. Choice of an Audi is because that's the car I drive. So the original manufacturer is Audi or VWs from that image. And then when I take the car, buy it the first time, they tell me that you must bring the car every 15,000 kilometers. You must bring the car in for checkup. It doesn't mean that the car is broken. So in engineering technical terms, we call that philosophy maintenance. It's just the philosophy of the design of the car. Because they're the original equipment or manufacturer, they know what could go wrong with the car, what components wears off. Of course, it's a function of your driving behavior and other things, but they know on average that this is what we are expecting. So what I do is that I take this car. So think of my car as a power station, a unit at the power station. I drive it. And with the modern cars, it tells you that you are due for service in the next 2,000 kilometers. I get to that point, I go past that point. I make no effort to take the car in. And I get surprised 23,000 kilometers later, it has broken. So that's philosophy maintenance. So we have not been, in some instances, that has not been done. And of course, in some instances, in my car, because it's under motor plan, I don't have to pay for it. But in this instance, it could be that you have to pay for it when you have to take it in as part of that philosophy maintenance. And because I don't have that money, I choose not to. And when the car breaks down, it means that there's multiple components that are broken down. And that's when the unit gets to be taken out of operation. So that car is not there on the road, it's now in the garage. And then it reduces that unit, our performance of the power station, what we call the energy availability factor. So there's this car that is out.